Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf 10. Okay. Today's daf is sponsored by Jessica Shklar and Emily Michelson in honor of the wedding of their nephew, Ariel Kahn, son of our fellow learner, Ruth Leah Kahn, to Miriam Holmes in Brooklyn on Monday. Mazal tov. Today's daf is sponsored by Phyllis Hecht with Hakarat Tov to Ribono Shel Olam and to my Hadran Daffers and Michelle as I cross the 2-year milestone, Tov Lahodot LaHashem. May the schut of our learning bring an end to this war, bring Yeshua for the Chatufim, Hatzlachat to the Chayalim, and Briut to all Cholim, and usher in the final Geulah. And today's daf is sponsored by Miriam and Mayor Tannenbaum in honor of the engagement of their son of Rami to Rachel Schloss. With gratitude to Hashem, may they be zocheh to build a bayit ne'eman b'Yisrael, shirbu smachot b'Yisrael. Mazal tov. Okay, we are going to get started with the bottom of Chet Amud Bet. We're continuing with the Tzedaka Sugyot. And we have Abai. If you remember, we ended with Abai basically saying, I didn't want to use the mats in the shul because it was taken from charity money. And then when he learned that you can change funds from one thing to another, the city can decide, oh, we don't need the funds for charity, we're going to move it to buy mats for the shul. Then he realized that he can use it. Another realization is going to come to from seeing someone's actions is the following. Amar Abai. From the beginning, 2 lines from the bottom of Daf Chet Amud Bet. In the beginning, I thought that I had to do 2 different money bags or 2 different, tzedaka boxes. One for the people of the city and one for the people in general, right? De alma is for the whole world, right? It doesn't really mean he wasn't giving charity to the whole world, but it meant people outside of our city. But Kevin Deshama Hada Amrli Shmuel Rav Tachli Farber Avdimi, but then I heard Shmuel tell Rav Tachli Farber Avdimi that this is what he said: Avid Chad Kisa Va'at Ne'ala. I do one, but I make a stipulation from the beginning. I'm collecting this money for the people of the city, but if I need to, I'm going to use it for, or if I don't need it for the people of the city, I'm going to use it for other people. And then you put it all in one place. Then when I saw that, so I did the same thing. Rav Ashi goes even further and says, I don't even need to make the stipulation out loud or even not out loud, because because anyone who gives charity to me, right? This is exactly what we call a rabbi's discretionary fund. What is a rabbi's discretionary fund? People give it to the rabbi, knowing that the rabbi will decide who needs it the most. They don't need to know what, how, this, that. Was it given to people in the city? Was it not given to people in the city? So he says, anyone who gives money gives it to me, knowing I'm going to do with it what I think is right. Well, whatever I think or whatever I need, that's where I'm putting it. And therefore, I don't need to make any stipulations because it's just kind of built into the agreement when people give it to me. Okay, now we're going to get to a story. And the story is based on what we've been dealing with until now is this bright. We started with the bright about collecting with 2 and giving it out with 3. And then how the tamcho is different. We collect it with 3, we give it out with 3. And then we got to, if you designate something for this, you can change it if you need to. And from there, we got to the people of the city, not only that, but can make all sorts of stipulations about measurements, about prices, about minimum wage. And the last thing was about penalizing people for not keeping laws that the people put in place. Okay, so this basically means that a city can decide we have certain rules and we enforce them. So that's what our story is going to be about. There were these 2 tabachim, 2 butchers, or maybe even more than 2 butchers. The Bach says it wasn't Beit Trey, it was just Hanu Tabachei. The agreement among butchers was the following, okay, in order to make sure that, okay, try to imagine the situation, but in order to make sure there wasn't too much competition between butchers, what they did is, Avde and Yana Bahade Adade, they made arrangements to come on the Avid Biyom de Chavre, Nikru Alamashke. Everyone has a day they get to work, and everybody brings their meat to that butcher on that day. And the other butchers can't work on that day. So everyone has their day of the week or a few days of the week, whatever it is, they made an arrangement. And the arrangement was that anyone who doesn't fulfill this agreement, they will tear the hide of the animal that they slaughtered when it wasn't their day. So in fact, what happened? So one of them was working on a day that wasn't his day to work. And they did exactly what they said they were going to do, which is they tore the hide, which all sounds like everything was done right. Atu the Kameh to Rava, but they brought the case before Rava because the butcher who lost his animal's hide said, why they do this? I want to get compensated. Which you think, why should he get compensated? Anyway, let's see what happens. So they come before Rava. Rava made the people who tore the hide compensate him for the loss. So Rav Yemer bar Shlemia comes with this question to Rava. We could have done the same. It says in that Braita. They can penalize. This was a rule they made in the town. They're allowed to penalize. So why are you making them compensate for the penalty? Lo ahadro le Rava. Rava didn't even answer. Okay? Just ignores. This is the first time we're going to see ignoring today. We're going to see it in another situation as well. Amar Rav Papa, Shapir Avid de lo ahadro le mide. So later they try to explain Rava's behavior. So Rav Papa says, actually, he was right for not responding. Now we learn that. This whole issue of stipulating, making rules, enforcing them, that's all the town can decide if there's no one prominent, no important prominent person in town. But if there's someone prominent like Rava in town, and that's possibly why Rava didn't even answer them, he was so offended. But if there's someone like Rava in the town, you can't make any sort of arrangements unless you do it, according to Rashi, is you do it in front of him. In other words, you can decide on a stipulation, but it has to be instituted, the rule from the beginning, in front of Rava. And therefore, the fact that it wasn't, basically this other butcher didn't take it seriously because he said this wasn't done in front of Rava, and he was right. Because Rava said, as long as if you didn't do it in front of me, it doesn't really mean anything. So although it seems like the city has flexibility to decide on rules and regulations, if there's someone prominent in the city, obviously, figure out what does prominent mean and who's considered prominent. Obviously, no one would disagree about Rava being a prominent person. So then you have to do it in front of that person. Tanu Rabbanit. This is an interesting one, and especially in light of yesterday where we said people who collect charity, you have to, people are suspect of them all the time. Here comes the Gemara and says, the Braita, and says, Ein mechashvim b'tzedaka gabei tzedaka v'lo behekdeshim hagizbarim. You do not start checking up on people who collect charity and making sure that they're not misusing funds. And likewise with the temple treasurer, the person collecting money for all the hekdesh, all the dedications to the temple, you don't start checking up after them. We can assume they're trusted. Bit of a difficult statement, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Even though there's no clear proof for this, we do have an allusion to this in a pasuk. Shenema. Now, in Sefer Melachim, there was in the time of Yehoash the king, he decides to do a big renovation of the temple, and they collect a lot of money, and there it discusses the whole thing of collecting money. So there's a pasuk that says, they didn't do a cheshbon, they didn't check up after the people who collected the money. Al yadam latet lo samelacha, the people who collected the money in their hands to give to the people who were working. Ki be'emunah hem osim, because they do their job. Like these people did their job properly, they were honest, and therefore they didn't need checking up after. So when it comes to the psak halacha, the commentaries all, kind of go off and say, well, a lot of them say, well, we're really only talking about if you know they're honest people, right? If you have reason to suspect, then obviously you can check up after them. But if you know they're honest people, then you don't have to start checking up after them. Because, because maybe it's a reaction to the fact, they said to the people, make sure not to put the money in your pocket, make sure to put it with the tzedaka when you find money on the street, because we don't want people accusing you of anything. And maybe because so many people like to accuse people, and maybe they were trying to protect the tzedaka collectors. Like, who wants to be in a job that everybody's checking up on you and doubting you? So maybe perhaps this is a reaction to that, to a reaction to a natural tendency of people to be nervous that who knows what people are doing with your money. No, you have to trust them. And then commentaries say, right, you trust people until they're not trustworthy, right? If you find out something went wrong, then you could check up on them after that, or maybe fire them from their job. And like I mentioned, we all know that there's cases where this happens, where people collect money for all sorts of things and then use it for their own personal benefit or whatever it might be. Amar Rabbi Elazar, here comes the flip, which is even if you have someone who you trust And, and this could be b'toch beito, this could be for any kind of money issues you have going on, or it could be for charity, it could be for anything really. This is just good advice. Yatzul v'yimneh. And why are we bringing this up here? Because they quote the pasuk when they gave the money for the temple in those, just the description there in Sefer Melachim. It says shenemar vayatzulu vayimnu. They tied it up and they counted. It really is the reverse. First they counted, then they tied up the money. So they're saying when you give someone money, you're giving cash for something. I know many people usually do this, right? You often count the cash in front of them because otherwise there's no proof that you gave them the right amount of money. So usually, you count it and you say, here, look, this is the amount of money. And then you can tie it up so that nothing falls, right? And it doesn't get lost in between you giving it to them and then putting it away. So that's a good method. This is just good advice. Count the money, tie it up, and then give it to the person. Amar Rav Huna. Now we have a question. If already we're talking about checking up on the people who collect charity, what about checking up on the people who are asking for charity? Right? That's always a huge question. How do we know they're legit? How do we know they're really poor? Are we supposed to check? Are we not supposed to check? And in what situation? We're going to have a split, a machloket, and a split between people who are asking for money, for food, and people who are asking for money for clothing. There's a difference. And it's going to come from a pasuk in Yeshayahu chapter 58, which is a chapter that we read on Yom Kippur, very central chapter in Yeshayahu. That's why we read it on Yom Kippur. And we're going to quote a bunch of, at the end of today's stuff, we're also going to quote some psukim from that chapter. So Rav Huna says, Amar Rav Huna, bodkim lemizono ve'em bodkim l'ksut. When it comes to giving for food, you can check and make sure they really are poor. But when it comes to giving money for clothing, we don't check at all. You can either prove it from a pasuk or you can prove it from logic. ABBA structure, right? The last one we just mentioned. Well, I'll prove it by svara. Hai kamevaze, hai lo kamevaze. If someone doesn't have clothes, it's embarrassing. They walk around wearing torn clothing, or maybe they're walking around without clothing at all. That's embarrassing. So because it's such an embarrassment, we don't want them to be walking around in a way that's embarrassing to them. We immediately give them, we don't start checking up. Whereas someone who's poor and doesn't have money for food, no one really notices. It's not shown. Now, obviously, really malnourished people, it is noticeable. But we're talking about someone just needs some money for food. It's not an embarrassment for them to be walking on the streets without eating, so they're hungry, which you could say that's torturous. We're going to get back to that in the other opinion. But this is the logic of this opinion. Here's a pasuk. Here's the pasuk from Yeshayahu. Now, if you're looking in a Gemara, it says it with a sin. The pasuk really says it with a samach. Samach and sin, since they sound the same. Often in Gemaras, we see them switch them around. And here, we're going to see another switch, which is once we turn it to a sin, we're going to be able to turn it to a shin. And that's what we're allowed in the world of drashot. We're allowed to do that kind of thing. Because shin and sin are the same letter, just with the dot on the other side. So halo paros l'ra'ev lachmecha. So we go a sin to a sin, from a samach to a sin to a shin. Bishin ktiv. They say, really, it's written with a shin. In other words, could be written that, right? The truth is, I didn't look in the inside. Now, I think it's written with a samach, but they're saying, read it with a shin. Pirosh v'hadar havle. Now, this pasuk, I should really read you the whole pasuk because we're going to darshan the whole pasuk throughout the daf, and we're going to see in a minute the continuation of that pasuk. It says, "Halo paros l'ra'ev lachmecha," which is give a poor person bread. Va'aniyim murudim tavi bayit, and you will bring poor people who are murudim. Now, murudim are usually bad people into your house. This is a bit of a strange pasuk. We're going to have to understand it later because it sounds like we're talking about something good, and then all of a sudden we get to something bad. And then it says, Ki tirei Aaron v'chisito u'b'sarcha lo titalem. So we'll just explain the first four words here. When you see a naked person, you should cover them. Okay, so what we're focusing right now is on the first four words, and then skip the next four words, and then get to the next four. Paros l'ra'ev lachmecha. Parosh, first check, and then give them. So that's what we mean by parosh, not pros, give out, but parosh, like to explain. So to explain, you need to go in depth and check it out. That's what it means here. Check them out first. And then hatam ktiv, it also says ki tirei Aaron v'chisito. When you see something, well, give them clothing, la'alter, immediately. It doesn't say paros, check, right? Parosh. Rabbi Yehuda Amar, the opposite. That's what I would have thought, right? Someone needs food, give them food right away. Don't start checking, give them food. But clothing, maybe, you need to check. At least that's my initial tendency. You might disagree. Again, I could prove it by logic. I could prove it by a pasuk. Here's the logic. One's suffering, really physically suffering from not having food. The other is not suffering. Okay, they need clothes, but they're not suffering. And now they're going to go back to the same pasuk. Now they understand it's written with the samach. It means paros, give immediately to a poor person bread. When you see someone who's naked, cover them. Now, they're going to explain as when it is really seen to you, clearly seen to you. How will it be clearly seen? If you check up on their background and see, are they really poor? So each one basically proved the opposite. Tanya Kavate de Rav Yehuda, and here's just a braita that shows the halacha like Rav Yehuda, the second opinion we saw. Amar Kisuni, if they say, cover me with clothing, bodkim acharav, we check. Parnasuni, I need parnasa, I need food, ain bodkim, we don't check. Okay, Tnan Hatam, next issue. What if you have a poor person coming into town for the night or coming for the day, and they're passing through and they need money? What are you supposed to provide them with? Okay, you need to give him, a simple way of saying this, you need to give a loaf of bread of the following size. What size is it? Well, it's a loaf of bread that, and I'm going to start from the end of the sentence. When arba sein or besela, when you can buy in the shuk, when the price of wheat, not flour, not bread, but the price of wheat is, you can buy 4 se'ah of wheat for a selah. And then according to that, when you make a loaf of bread that's going to cost a pundion, that's going to be X, weight of however many grams or ounces or pounds are in that loaf of bread. That would cost a pundion when the rate of flour is this. That's the size of a loaf that you have to give him. Okay, it's a bit of a weird, complicated way of saying how big the loaf of bread needs to be, but that's how they determine it. When the price of wheat is this, and a loaf of bread, and the pundion will buy you a loaf of bread this size and that kind of, in that market, that's the size of bread you need to provide. Lan, if he sleeps overnight, you have to give him money for sleeping overnight. What is that? My parnasat lina. Amra papa, puria ubesaga. You have to give a bed and a pillow. Okay, those are the basic needs of someone for sleeping at night. Shabbat, if they stay over Shabbat, this is again stressing the importance of 3 meals, that you even have to give a poor person who's staying over Shabbat 3 meals. Tana, another bright. If you have a person who's willing to knock on people's doors, which not everybody's willing to do, and collect charity, then it seems like the city Kupad doesn't need to support this person because they figure out how to get money on their own. Just a little bit strange that we wouldn't say, well, let's do it so that they don't have to do that. Now, right, obviously, I think they're struggling with, not enough funds to go around. So if they can be taken care of other ways, then the Kupa of the community doesn't need to support that. But then there was a case, he came for a papa to get money. Presumably, it seems like money from the town. Lo mizakika, so he didn't give them, which seems in line with what we just said. Amale Rav Sama, Rav Yiva, Rav Papa. But Rav Sama, the son of Rav Yiva, says to Rav Papa, this is a problem. This guy's going around knocking on doors. Now, if people see that he came to your door and you didn't give him, right? If you're not going to give him, you set an example for everybody. No one else is going to give him either. If they see that Rav Papa didn't give him when he came to his door, no one else is going to give money either. And you're going to cause this guy's death. But doesn't it say in a braita, so he says to him, but I'm going by the braita. The braita says I don't have to. What it means is you don't have to really support this person, but you do need to give something. So otherwise, it really doesn't look good, and no one then is going to give money. So at least give something small, even if it's not significant. Amar Rav Asi, Lo'olam al yimna adam atzmo milatet shlishit hashekel b'shana. Here Rav Asi gives you an amount of money you should give per year. We'll see in a minute where he learns it from. It doesn't sound like a lot of money, 1/3 of a shekel for a year. That's what he says. Shneimar v'ha'emanu aleinu mitzvot latet aleinu shlishit hashekel b'shana lavodat beit Eloheinu. This is in Nehemiah. It says they put on the people to all give a shlishit of a shekel per year for the avodah in the temple, and they compare that to charity. But Amrav Asi, another thing we learn from this pasuk, shkulat tzedaka keneged kol mitzvot. They love saying this, right? This mitzvah is so important, it's equal to all the mitzvot together. How do you get that? Well, notice the pasuk. Shneimar ve'emanu aleinu mitzvot. He said, we put upon ourselves commandments. It was really only one commandment. It was charity. Mitzvah ein ktiv kanel mitzvot. And from there we learn it's like many, like all the mitzvot together. Siman. Now we have a siman for a bunch of sugyot we're going to get to. Statements of Rabbi Elazar about charity. Gadol, Mikdash, and Moshe. So Gadol is the first one. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Gadol ha-me'aseh yoter min ha'oseh. It's not ma'aseh, it's me'aseh. What is me'aseh? Me'aseh is to force someone. Okay, so get says a get that we force someone to give, which is problematic. Gadol ha-me'aseh, someone who encourages others to do a mitzvah, is better than yoter min ha'oseh, better than doing it yourself. Okay, if you can enable other people to do mitzvot, that's the, or push other people to do mitzvot, that's greater than you doing it yourself. How do we know this? Shenema, we quote a pasuk from Yeshayahu Lamed Bet. V'hayam ma'aseh hatzedaka shalom v'avodat hatzedaka ashkefa betach ad olam. We're comparing ma'aseh hatzedaka, which sounds like the act of charity, but no, it means to encourage people to give charity, versus avodat hatzedaka, which is the actual giving of the charity. And in the first part of the pasuk, it says, if you do the first thing, you will get shalom, peace, which they think is the most important thing. Okay, a lot of this stuff is going to resonate with us being in a time of war right now, how important peace is. And you would think the second part is also just important, hashke babetach ad olam, right? You want quiet and security forever. So the ad olam probably goes on both parts, shalom ad olam and hashke babetach, but peace seems like a word that's stronger than hashke and betach, quiet and security. So basically what we're going to say is, therefore you see ma'aseh is more important. Someone who encourages others to do is more important than avodah, than actually doing it. Someone who is zacha, if you are worthy, halo paros l're'ev lachmecha. Now we're going to get back to those words we skipped in that pasuk. How do we all of a sudden have something positive, like go give charity, and then negative, aniyim rudim tavi bayit, which is bring poor people who are going to, not exactly clear what this is, but merudim, like from married, rebellious people, into your house. So zacha, if you're a good person and you're worthy, then halo paros l're'ev lachmecha, meaning also if you give charity, then great. You'll give charity. Your money will go to poor people. Lo zacha, aniyim merudim tavi bayit. That same money will end up, if you're not worthy of merit, or you didn't give your money to charity, what will happen? That same money is going to go somewhere else. Where's it going to go? You're going to have to put people up in your house, the enemy's soldiers. That's what they would do. They would come into a city and they would board in people's houses. You're going to end up with these people in your house and you're going to have to support them. So that same money, and we'll get to some stories later, not in today's stuff, but coming up, people who ended up having to have these boarders in their house and gave their money there instead of to charity. Or we'll see, not exactly, but we're going to come back to this interpretation of this verse. We're going to see that again in the next, I think it's the next daf. In Daf Yud. Amar lahu Rava l'bnei Mechoza, b'mtuta minaychu usu b'hadei adadi ki echad yelahav lechu shlama b'machuta. So Rava said to the people of Mechoza, please encourage each other to give charity because that will bring peace in our land. Okay, so if you want to give peace, okay, one of the big messages of today, which again, very relevant to today, is if you give charity, that will bring you peace, that will bring Yeshua, salvation, that will bring, right, if we go back to Phyllis's bracha for today, her dedication, right, that's what's going to do it. It's giving charity. Okay, we're going to see it a few more times today. Amar Rabbi Elazar, or particularly toward the end of the daf. Bisman shebein hamikdash kayam, adam shokel sheklo umitkaper lo. In the time of the temple, how would you atone for your sins? You would give the machatzira shekel, the half shekel, and with that you would be atoned. Achshav she'ein beit hamikdash kayam, right? The same way we talk about we would bring korbanot, it would be atoned. Now instead of korbanot, what do? We have prayers. So what about the machatzira shekel? So what's the comparison to the machatzira shekel? Obviously, imosim tzedaka, right? Giving charity. That's the closest thing we have. And then mutaf, im lav ba'inu mot ha'olam v'nonim b'zroa. Okay, either you're going to give charity, and this is the same thing as before. Either you're going to give charity, and then great. If you don't give charity, the enemies will come and they will take your money. And basically, whatever money you should have given to charity will be taken away from them. So it's worth it to, don't think about the loss of money because you're going to lose your money anyway. It's just a matter, you're going to lose it in a good way where you did a mitzvah and fulfilled something positive than having it seized by the enemy. Although he adds something a little bit strange, If the enemies take away your money, now some people view this as taxes, right? Your money ends up going to taxes. It's still considered charity, although there's a whole discussion. Giving taxes can't be considered part of your charity. There's a whole debate about this in general. But the pasuk says that nuksayich zakana. What is a nubes? That's someone who takes your money, like forcefully, someone who takes it from the government or something. That is also considered charity. In other words, there is some redeeming value to it, even though, right, it's considered something like better to give to charity, but at least it's considered something positive. And that we get from a verse. Amarava, moving now to Amud Bet, and we're now going to get to some strange line he has, which we're going to only figure out a little bit later. Hi, Milta, this big introduction to what he's about to say. He says, what I'm about to say, hi, Milta, these words, Ishtaili, this person told me, who, now he calls this person Ula. It's not Ula that we know of Ula. Ula means a young child. Okay, it's a way of a little bit putting him down, although it's a little bit strange he's putting him down because he's basically quoting some halacha, some nice statement in his name. Ula mishagsheg orchate de'ime. He's this child who, tried to translate the way I saw it translated in the current, perverted his mother's ways. Okay? What does this mean? We have no idea, and we're only going to get it after we hear what he actually said, and then we'll hear a whole story about it till we get to it, but it's a very beautiful image. Okay, and he said it Mishmei Rabbi Elazar. Now, there's a debate about who we're talking about. Is it Rav Sheshet, who was this Ula, who was Mishagsheg Orchidei De'ime, or was it Rav Achtavoy Bar Ami? Now, they're both going to appear in the story later, and it becomes very confusing whose mother it is, and we'll go through a little bit the different options and why we would favor one over the other. So now here's the statement. Okay, again, we're going to get totally off of that whole thing that he was called Ulam Shagsheg or Ime. But basically, okay, just to simplify things, Rava quoted, let's call it Rav Sheshet, okay, or Rav Achtavoy, saying something in the name of Rabbi Elazar about charity. Again, we have all these statements of Rabbi Elazar about charity. That's what we're in right now. My dachtiv vayabash tzedaka kishiryon. Okay, this is a pasuk in Yeshayahu also, in Parak Tet, the next chapter after that, that you will wear tzedaka like a shield. So why is tzedaka like a shield? What's a shield made up of in those days, right? It was different pieces of protection, right? That all together, right? If you have one little piece, it's not going to, right? One little piece of armor is not going to protect you. But if you put them all together, it blocks your whole body and you're protected. So tzedakah, this is something I think they ingrained in us when we were young, right? Give a penny, give 10 agulot, like it seems like nothing, but kol pruta mitzdarefet lecheshbon gadol, right? Or, even if you give $10 to some charity, if you give, everybody gives $10, you can really get a lot of money. Rabbi Chanina Amar Mehacha, he learned the same idea, but from a different pasuk, which is a bit of a strange pasuk to learn it from because it's a very negative pasuk. Uchebeged idim kotzikotenu. This is a pasuk, also in Yeshayahu, talking about that the people are bad and they're not just, and all their just actions that seem, righteous deeds are actually considered like a dirty, disgusting piece of clothing. In other words, all your charitable deeds, when you're not a good person, they all really mean nothing. And it's just like stains on clothing. Okay, but despite the fact that this is negative, it actually compares clothing to charity. Now, when you make clothing, right, you start with a thread and one thread, and then you add more threads and more threads and more threads, and all together it creates one big garment. So one learned it from the Shiur and one learned it from the beged, but it's the same idea. And I was thinking both of them actually are kind of similar because it's, right, we talk about tzedaka tatzil mimavet, charity saves you from death. And it's this idea here that, Shiur is protective. You give charity, it's a little bit, but all of it adds up to, and it can all protect. And even a beged is somewhat protection, maybe protection from the sun, protection from, right, whatever it might be, but it's not the same kind of protection as a Shiur, but it is also protection. So now we're going to get totally off topic. You can try to think if you could see any connection between this. I didn't come up with one yet, but of the content of this discussion. But in the simple reading, right, what we're trying to figure out is why when Rava quoted from this person, again, either Rav Sheshet or Rav Achtavoy, why did he call him Ula Meshakshev or Chediime? Well, there was a story. Rav Achtavoy bar Ami by Rav Sheshet, and that's why there's going to be some confusion because these are the two main characters in the story. Rav Achtavoy asked Rav Sheshet the following question. So we're talking about a leper in the days after the leper. Okay, the leper has his gil, where like he's closed in to see what happens if it's going to be determined it's a leper or not. Then there's days where the leper is determined to be a leper, a definite leper. If the Kohen comes back and says you're a leper, you then have 7 days and perhaps even more, depending on what you look like at the end of it, whether the leprous mark goes away or not, or has certain things that make you not anymore a leper. And then that's called the Yemei Hezgeho. And then you have Yemei Sipuro, which are after that, you still have to count 7 days before you become pure. So how do you know that during those last 7 days that you're counting before in your purification process, you also, if you touch a person, you pass on impurity to another person? Okay, this leper is impure. They touch someone, right? There's different kinds of impurity and how they get passed. We'll talk about a few of them today. So how do we know? That's what Rav Achtavoy asked Rav Sheshet. Amar lo ho'ilim mitamei begadim mitamei adam. Well, the pasuk there says that all the clothes you're wearing, when you wear clothes, when you're in those 7 days, whatever clothes you wear become impure. So if your clothes become impure, obviously, if you touch someone else, he thinks is more severe, you're going to be impure. To which Amarle, Rav Achtavoy questions that and says, I don't think it's necessarily so clear that way, because Dilma Tuma B'chibuin Shane. Maybe like the clothing is on you, it's attached to you. So it would be likely that that might become impure, but not necessarily someone who just touches you. And why do I think that maybe there's a distinction? Because here I'm going to show you a different place where we have impurity, and there is that distinction. If you move a nevela without touching it, okay, classic example is like you're on a seesaw, okay? You go down, the nevela goes up, or you go up, the nevela goes down, you're moving it without touching it. That's called lahasit. You're matame begadim ve'eno matame adam. While you're moving this dead animal, which carries impurity, as you're moving it, you have impurity, and the clothing on you becomes impure. But if while you're doing that, while you're on the seesaw, someone comes by and you touch them, they won't become impure. So I don't know why you think that those are connected. That just because you're matame begadim doesn't necessarily mean you'd be matame adam. Amarle, so he's going to throw some examples at him, Rav Sheshet. So he says, I'll give you a different example where this does work. Sheretz de matame adam minalan. How do we know that a person who comes in contact with a sheretz, touches a sheretz, becomes a dead creepy crawler, of the 8 shvatzim, becomes impure? Lab mishum de matame begadim. Is it not because it's clear in the pasuk that it's matame your clothes if a sheretz comes in contact with you? So obviously, if you touch it, you'll be impure. Amarle says, kind of ridiculousness. Sheretz behediktive. You don't learn that sheretz is matame, someone who touches it, from the fact that the clothes become impure, because it says in the pasuk explicitly, "O ish asher yiga b'chol sheretz." He says to Rosh Hashanah, like, what kind of ridiculousness are you trying to make proofs from cases? Oh, we'll learn this from here when this is said explicitly in the verse. So Rosh Hashanah says, fine, I'll give you something else. Ela shikvat zera de mitame adam minalan. How do we know that semen, if a man touches semen or a person touches semen, will become impure? Lab mishum dehoil mitame begadim mitame adam. Is it not because, right now, this is different. Semen that comes out of a person is obviously impure. But the question is, what if you touch semen? Okay, that's not, on a person. It's just on the ground. I don't know. You touch it, you become impure. So now that doesn't say it in the pasuk. But it must be because just like someone who has semen emit from their body is mitame their clothes, also we should assume that it's mitame adam. So Amar Leis, what are you talking about? Shechet zeranami bed. So is in the pasuk explicitly. Now it's not exactly explicit, but it is derived from the pasuk directly. What does it say there? O ish, and there it's ish asher yitzei mimenu shechet zera, and it says or a man who has a seminal emission. Now, why do you need the word o? Just to say ish. So o comes to include o ish l'rabot tanogea. That includes someone who touches it. So every time, and that's what happened here. Let's just go through. Rav Avtavoy asked a question. Rav Sheshet gave an answer. Rav Avtavoy questioned the logic of his answer based on some other case of Tumah. Rav Sheshet tried to bring a proof that, no, my logic is correct. And here I'm going to prove it because these places aren't in the verses in the Torah, and yet it's true. It must be they learned it from Tumah B'Gadim, the fact that they're Mitamei Adam, which was the whole thing he was trying to prove. And every time he quoted a pasuk, the 2 times, Rav Avtavoy said, right, he quoted the context, right? Said, oh, from here you must derive this. Rav Avtavoy said, what are you talking about? It's an explicit pasuk. And now we're going to learn that when Rav Avtavoy said this, and this is what we say, it's all about your tone of voice. Every time he responded, and I tried to do it a little bit like this, but he responded very mockingly. Okay, it wasn't like he just said, what do you mean? There's a pasuk, like in a respectable way. No, he was mocking and made fun of Rav Sheshet. Okay, well, as a result, what happens when you don't act appropriately in the Beit Midrash and treat someone else in a wrongful manner? Chalash da'ateh to Rav Sheshet. So first of all, he insulted Rav Sheshet by mocking him. Rav Sheshet then got sick. Ish tikra, and then as a result, because Rav Avtavoy caused Rav Sheshet to get sick by humiliating him and then caused him to be sick from it, Ish tikra Rav Avtavoy bar ami v'yakar Talmudeh. He became mute and he forgot all of his Torah. So he couldn't speak and he lost his Torah that he had learned. So he was really severely punished. Aki ime. Now here comes the problem. His mother shows up. Now his mother, we don't know whose mother. Is it Rav Avtavoy's mother who wants to protect her son? Or is it Rav Sheshet's mother who is worried about the fact either cared for Rav Avtavoy somehow, or wants to go out to bat for him? We'll see in the end. It's more logical to say it was Rav Avtavoy's mother who basically, and usually in these Talmudic stories, it's the relative of the person who's suffering that now comes in and says, come on, go pray for mercy to the person who caused it. So Rav Sheshet basically caused this, even though you could say Rav Avtavoy caused it in the first place. But Rav Sheshet right now, by getting upset and being offended, caused Rav Avtavoy to be sick. So comes his mother, again, not clear whose mother, and Kabachya comes in, starts crying. That's why it seems more logical. Rav Avtavoy's mother, later in the story, it's going to seem more logical. It was Rav Sheshet's mother, and you'll see in a minute why. But let's assume right now it's Rav Avtavoy's mother, or again, it could be Rav Sheshet's mother just wants to protect Rav Sheshet from having caused this problem to Rav Avtavoy, starts crying, tzavcha, she's screaming, screaming, screaming. And again, as before, lo ashkachba, as the story before where we saw someone just ignore it, I think it was Rava. Here, Rav Sheshet just totally ignores her. Okay, I want you to remember that Rav Sheshet was blind. Okay, now some people think he became blinded after the story, and you'll see why, like not on account of the story, but he wasn't yet blind, or perhaps he was blind, which is also interesting to see about how the story progresses. First of all, she's screaming, so even if he was blind, he heard her screaming, and maybe he didn't see her crying, but he did hear her screaming. And basically, he ignores her. Okay, what she wants is, again, either his own mother or Rav Avtavoy's mother wants him to pray for mercy. But Amrele, so what does she do? When she sees no response, she decides to do something crazy. And that's why he perverted his mother's ways because he ignored her and caused this crazy reaction. What does she do? Go look at these breasts that you suckled from. In other words, how could you ignore me? I nursed you with these breasts. Now, this is why it seems pretty clear it's Rav Sheshet's mother. Those who go with Rav Avtavoy's mother, because it did seem more logical, Rav Avtavoy's mother would be the one coming out to bat for Rav Avtavoy, will have to say that she was the nursemaid, perhaps. Okay? It's also a little strange that she exposes her breasts in front of Rav Sheshet if she wasn't his mother. Even if she was his mother, it's quite strange. Whether she really exposed them or just said, well, look at, these are the breasts that, without actually exposing herself, that's also possible. And remember, if he was blind, he wouldn't have seen it anyway. So some people say he got the message even without her without seeing it, right? Anyway, that was what basically caused him to be called the person who perverted his mother's ways, which again, if it's Rav Avtavoy, then it's talking about Rav Avtavoy whose mother's ways were perverted on account of what he did, but more indirectly. So again, there's different ways to understand the story. I'm not going to get too much more into all the different possibilities. What happens in the story? Well, at this point, she grabbed his attention and okay, so now he basically prays for mercy. Okay, so yeah, that's what I was saying. I'm not sure. Was I not clear? Yes, she was either Rav Sheshet's mother or Rav Avtavoy's mother was Rav Sheshet's wet nurse. Okay, that's the idea here. So because she's definitely speaking to Rav Sheshet, that's clear. Okay, so now the question is, okay, this was all a story. This is all because we talked about the Shiur Yom, but in the middle, we had the story that gave us the background, and we never got an answer to the question. How do we know that a mitzvah during the May Sipuro are matame adam, b'maga, by touching? So Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai Omer, Ne'amar kibus b'gadim b'yimei sipuro, v'ne'amar kibus b'gadim b'yimei chiluto, ma lahala matame adam, av ka matame adam. So basically, we're going to learn it from the Yemei Hesger, days where they're quarantined. Okay, during the quarantine days when they're definitely impure, there's kibus b'gadim, and also here there's kibus b'gadim, meaning your clothes become impure, you have to wash them. And their Adam is impure, and they're right by touching the person you pass on impurity, so therefore it must be, we learn the same thing to there. Okay, getting back to charity, and now we're on the one in the Siman, we had the different things, now we're up to Moshe. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Gadol hoset tzedaka b'setel yoter Moshe Rabbeinu. You give charity in secret, you are greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, that's pretty hard to achieve. It's basically just trying to say, this is really important. Moshe himself says, I was scared from anger and rage of God. Okay, there's two ways to read this pasuk. Matan b'seter yichpe'af, that means giving in secret will move away anger. Okay, well, it will push away anger. Shochad is usually bribe. Here they don't mean a bribe, but shochad b'chek chema azah. So shochad could be also just giving something. Giving a gift b'seter, it's according to the way we're going to read it now, it's the parallel. It's the same thing. It's just a pasuk repeating two of the same ideas. And a shochad b'chek will also, now it's missing the verb, yichpeh, to pacify, well, it will pacify chema azah, also real strong anger. Okay, so we have, or anger and rage, let's just call them. It's two different words for anger. So what do you see here? God, that Moshe was scared of these two things, and if you give the Seder, you'll be even greater than Moshe because you won't have to fear either of these two things. But Pliga to Rabbi Yitzchak understands pasuk differently than Rabbi Yitzchak. De Amal, we're going to have three different ways of reading this pasuk. Av kofeh, b'chema no kofeh. The pacify word is only, the kofeh word, yichpeh, is only in the first part of the pasuk. It's saying, but shochad b'chek actually won't do anything about chema. It will push off but not chema. Okay, it will push off anger, not rage. Shenemar b'shochad b'chek chama azah, meaning even though you've given a gift in secret, without anyone knowing, chema azah, still you're going to have anger. In other words, it's only this strong, not that strong. Some people say, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, kol dayan, he understands the pasuk totally differently. Shochad is really shochad, a bribe. It's comparing giving secretly. That's great. That's going to get away with anger. But shochad, if you take bribes, kol dayan shenotel shochad, maybe chama azah la'olam, you're going to bring anger to the world by taking bribes. Shenemar b'shochad b'chei. Okay, and that's a totally different interpretation. But Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, another statement of his, kol anotem pruta la'ani mitbarech b'shesh brachot. Now, basis on these psukim, I told you we got back to Yeshayahu. I recommend you read these. I'm not going to read everything and translate it because most of these things aren't even written in the Gemara. Okay, the box actually adds some of them. But basically what he's going to say is giving money to charity gives you 6 brachot. And if you read them, you'll see like earlier in the daf, it's really brachot that we could use today. And if you're mafaiso b'dvarim, if you speak to them and calm them down, you console them when they're struggling, a poor person who's suffering, and you speak to them and make them feel better, you even get 11 brachot. Okay, so this is really important things to both give them money and speak to them and treat them well and console them. We're back to our pasuk. Halo paros l're'ev lachmecha v'aniyim rudim tavi bayit v'chulei ki tira aron v'chulei, and then they don't quote the rest of it. Okay, it says all sorts of things. If you look in the Bach, you can even see them instead of opening a Tanakh, but you can also open the Tanakh. Okay, all these things. Then, okay, I recommend you read these psukim in the actual psukim, and you'll see all the brachot. If you're mefaiso b'dvarim, you get 11 brachot, and here it's a little bit weird because they do quote the psukim, but they don't actually quote all 11 of them, and they skip a bunch. But okay, this is all about giving your soul to them, okay? And nefesh na'ana taspia, you'll speak to them and console their soul. V'zarach b'choshech orecha v'apelatcha ketzoraim, okay? The instead of, you'll have light instead of darkness. The afela will be like the night will be like the afternoon. V'nachacha Hashem tamid v'spia b'tzachtzachot nafshecha u'banu mimcha chorvot olam mostei dor v'dor takum. Okay, all these good blessings will come upon you. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, my dachtiv rodef tzedaka v'chesed yimtza chayim tzedaka v'chavod. Okay, this is a bit of a strange pasuk. We're going to darshan it tomorrow also, at the end of today's, not beginning of tomorrow. But here we're going to ask a basic question. Rodef tzedaka v'chesed. You run after charity. We're going to just focus on that right now. You will find charity. What does it mean you'll find charity? It means you'll get charity. It means you'll be poor. Sounds a little bit weird. Mishum de rodef tzedaka, because you chase charity and meaning you gave a lot of charity. Now you're going to be poor and have to get charity. That doesn't sound like a blessing. That sounds like a curse. Omer ela lomar lecha kol rodef apart tzedaka kadosh baruch hu mamtzi lo ma'ot v'oseh ben tzedaka. God will help you get more money so that you can give more charity. That's what it means. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Amal, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mamtzi lo b'nei adam hamuganim la'asot b'hem tzedaka kedei lekabel aleihem scharo. God's going to make sure a different interpretation that you give it to the right people so that your actions will be deemed as charity and not that you gave to people who don't deserve it or who are bad people, who if you give them charity, it's not really considered that you did a mitzvah. And that's what we're going to see right now. La'afuke mai, what's this to say? And what are b'nei adam shed are not muhuganim? What do we mean? Well, la'afuke mididarish Rabbah, this drush of Rabbah, didarish Rabbah, my dechtiv. Now, here's a pasuk of Yeshayahu. If you remember, Yeshayahu was kind of tortured by the people of his own city on atoned, and he basically curses them. And he says to God, "You muchshalim lefanecha, they should stumble before you. Be'et apcha aseh bahem, and when you're angry, punish them, because when you're angry and punish them, you'll punish them even more." Amar Yeshayahu lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel Olam, afilu b'sha'ah shekofin et yitzram. Here's the drasha. Even when they don't give in to their evil inclination, they get over it. Umevakshim la'asot tzedaka lefanecha, and they want to do good deeds. What Yeshayahu is basically asking is, let them mess up their ways when they're trying to do good. Push them to the side so that they don't do good properly and they give to the wrong people. And that's what we're saying here. The blessing of this pasuk is the opposite of that, which is you'll be blessed to give tzedakah to the right people. Yeah, it's a bit of a hard daf to summarize because there's so many different things. Well, I'll try to summarize a few key issues. We had this issue of the takanot of the communities that they institute and whether you can do that or not and punish people on it as a result. We talked about checking into people, right? Are they trusted? The Gabait Tzedakah, are they trusted Aniyim to say that they're really poor? What do you do when someone comes into town? What are your responsibilities toward them? How much should you give a year? More important to encourage people than actually to do it yourself. The Tzedakah, all the different, right? Every little amount counts. We had the side story, which we're not getting, right? We don't really need to get into. That's not such a critical part of our daf about why he was called that, Rav Sheshet or Rav Achtovoy. Then we had the importance of giving charity in secret and the bracha that you will get by giving charity, which is you will give more charity or you'll give charity to the right people. That will finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day. Reminding everyone there's no Zoom class tomorrow. The Shiurim will be up early at 5 in the morning and then at 6 in the morning for the Shabbat daf. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Chodesh Tov. And we'll meet up on Zoom on Sunday. And have a good day, everyone.